Welcome to the third episode of 2021 Vision. My name is Nima.
And my name is Selena. Here on 2021 Vision, we aim to provide you with insight from trusted caregivers all around the nation. 2020 has motivated us to inspire you to appreciate the present, challenge you to cultivate your future, and motivate you to make a difference in the healthcare world.
On this episode, we are joined by Dr. Ozzie Delgado. Dr. Delgado obtained his Doctor of Pharmacy degree from Nova Southeastern University and his MBA from Florida Atlantic University. He spent almost 17 years at Cleveland Clinic, Florida, starting first as a clinical pharmacist and moving on to positions such as Director of Pharmacy, Administrator, Director of Clinical Operations, Senior Director of Operations, and lastly, Chief Operating Officer. He is currently the Chief Operating Officer at Healthcare Outcomes Performance Company and an adjunct professor at Florida International University.
We welcome Debra Brown. She obtained her MBA from Loyola University in Chicago and has a master's degree in science from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Debra J. Brown is president and CEO of the American College of Healthcare Executives, an international professional society of more than 48,000 healthcare executives who lead hospitals, healthcare systems, and healthcare organizations. Since becoming president and CEO of ACHE, Mrs. Bowen has been recognized by Modern Healthcare as one of the top 100 most influential people in healthcare and one of the top 25 women in healthcare.
Lastly, we welcome Dr. Connor Delaney. Dr. Delaney obtained his medical degree at University of College of Dublin, his research fellowship at the University of Pittsburgh, and his fellowship in colorectal surgery at Cleveland Clinic. Dr. Delaney is currently the CEO and president for the Cleveland Clinic, Florida region since October 2020. He oversees a system of 5 hospitals. Until 2020, Dr. Delaney served as chairman of the Digestive Disease and Surgery Institute at the Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, Ohio, and is a professor of surgery at Cleveland Clinic, Lerner College of Medicine at Case Western Reserve University. Dr. Delaney holds 5 patents for medical devices, techniques, and processes. So as a leader, a team, it plays a big part of your success as an organization and as you as an individual. What is your strategy in putting together a team that can set your organization apart from others?
So as I think about it, when you join an organization or join a team, you're usually not starting from scratch, right? You usually have a team that's existing. And depending on that team that you're joining, they're at a variable level of function. I've been lucky with the team I joined at Cleveland Clinic, Florida, that is a very highly functioning team across multiple hospitals doing a lot of complicated stuff. So as I think about building a team, you really want to attract and add talent. There's pros and cons to that, right? When you have a really good team, you also become a target for acquisition. So at Cleveland Clinic, where I've been for a long time, one of our opportunities and challenges is that we have some amazing people work for us. They spend time and then some other place picks them off as a department chair or as a section chief or as a pick your other talent person getting pulled off. But at the end of the day, I generally just try and get people who are the very best. That can mean a lot of different things. There's obviously the paper side of being very good. So it's training and experience and things they've done, but also the very best at complementing and fitting into a team, because you can bring in somebody who may either be on paper or by reputation very good, but if they're not the right fit for that team, it's not going to work very well. So you want the skill set, you want the fit, and it comes down to the personality and often communication and awareness skills of how to deal with people. And so then when you think of the broader team, it's a matter of trying to add enough people like that in the right space, fill holes that always happens, but no matter how sad any departure is, there's always somebody very good you can get. And so it becomes, and that injects new talent and new thought processes. So it's always, I never think of it as a final team. It's like a living document in a way. But always just trying to bring in the best and brightest who will complement each other and add to the others on the team.
Yeah, so I think one thing that is critical is in corporations and organizations in today's world, you can come across an organization's politics, if you will, that creates a lot of bureaucracy, kind of ways to get things done. And you kind of have to learn a little bit of the office politics a little bit to navigate through that. And I'm not saying that that's not appropriate to learn that as you join an organization. But my concept of creating a team is creating a safe zone. It needs to be, bring it no matter how raw or it needs to be. I'd rather have everybody around the table comfortable to be able to speak their mind, say what they need to say, and knowing that at the end of the day, when we reopen the door coming out of a room or an office or a meeting for that matter, we're all rowing in the same direction. I think that's so critical in a team environment. And I will tell you, I think from a differentiation standpoint, you still deal with that sometimes in organizations and corporations. And as you join an organization, I think number one, it's important to understand what those are, because those have been built via historical legacy, past leadership, cultural development. You have to understand what they are to make sure you're not stepping on landmines as you enter them. But then as you start to form your own team, as you kind of rally people around, you make them feel safe. And then that just kind of opens up a whole new world where they could actually be themselves, and you start seeing real value being brought to the table.
So first of all, ACHE is an organization that has a large imprint, but we are actually a very fairly small team. There's only 90 people who work at ACHE. So I am a big believer in leveraging the ecosystem of healthcare and where those levers of influence are. So what I look for when I'm really thinking about a team, and I've built several teams over the years, but the one I have right now, I think is outstanding. Of course, I'm biased, but I think it has to do with really trying to fine tune great matches. I mean, you need the talent to do the job, but you also need values that are aligned to the mission of the organization, because when you combine, the talent and the intrinsic motivation that people bring to the table, almost everyone I meet in healthcare wants to make a difference, and for the better, right? So the combination of that, I think, can be very powerful, as well as the attitude to get things done. This is not a time when people, can say, well, we used to do it this way, why don't we do it that way anymore? This is a time for creativity and for new problem solving, and having people who are willing to do that work and able to do that work is really important. So, I really look for the combination of that: talent, values, and attitude. And then I nurture it. I mean, you can't expect to just hire people and then have them go about and expect them to just, sort of go about their day to day without any nurturing or any direction, or frankly, just sometimes you just need time to talk. So I'm big on communication. During the pandemic, we met a couple of times a day. We were in constant communication, and even when I've talked to leaders about their own teams, that's what they also suggest. This is my interloper. I'm sorry, he's in the picture. They're recording, so hopefully that won't create too many problems for you. So in any case, that's what I would say. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, mistakes are inevitable. We all make them. But what would you say would be the biggest mistakes that you see people making, taking on new leadership roles?
I think sometimes you see people take on leadership roles and try and make a big decision or accomplish too much too quickly. And I think unless you're joining a team or taking over a role where there's a problem that you just have to fix urgently, right? And obviously then you have to have fast action. I think it's better to be thoughtful and measured in how you drive change within a team. So I think that's probably one of the primary ones, is that people almost push too hard, because I think it takes time to appreciate the people time to appreciate the skill sets, and then time to decide, and sometimes it's somebody just has too much on their plate. And so they're great and they may not be functioning. And if you made a quick decision, you'd think they weren't very good. And then with time, you realize, hey, this person actually is doing two people's jobs. They can't succeed and they're going to be better at part A. And we'll either add or move somebody else into part B. But I think by watching for a while and not rushing to judgment about various things, it gives you the opportunity to do things more thoughtfully and not cause problems.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm going to go back to a very common book read by a lot of people, which is The First 90 Days. It's a fantastic book. It's well known. Mistakes that people make, sometimes often not, try to, because they've had some inside kind of information of the organization, they'll rush to start making decisions prematurely without actually establishing relationships first. And that is a big mistake. I think you have to establish those relationships and really actively listen early on when you join an organization. You might be right. You might be technically and correctly, correct in what you want to change or what you want to accomplish, but it requires a little bit of self-discipline to be able to say, I'm going to pause and wait, because the value of the relationship from a long-term perspective means more so than actually just correcting what needs to get corrected immediately. And you kind of have to weigh both things. Those are not easy things to do, because as someone who is an operator or an executor, if you will, they just want to kind of fix things and help the organization move along. And you have to weigh that against the soft components of building the relationship long-term and what that could do for the team.
Well, I think it depends if people have been supervisors before, if they're managing people. People can manage people, they can manage projects, they can be influencers and have leadership roles with or without a title. I'm a firm believer in that. But when people are leaders and they're leading people, the biggest mistake I see people make is they're hesitant to give people feedback. Feedback is a gift. There are ways to give feedback that can be powerful and nurturing and constructive. No matter where people are at, I think they do struggle with that. Everybody wants to be liked. And sometimes people don't want to address sticky situations or things that are uncomfortable. And again, you really need to do that, and you need to do it in a real-time way. And I think a lot of people sort of underestimate the feedback and the tool to give feedback, and they don't exercise that skill very well. And really to learn that is a really important thing as a leader. And it doesn't always have to be negative. It can be developmental, but it can also be positive. Right? I mean, people need to know where they stand, and they need to be coached and developed. That can be a very powerful, positive thing, but you do have to learn how to do it, I think.
Change is very normal. That's how we grow. But change is a big and scary word for a lot of people as well. So how would you draw that fine line between too much change and not enough change when you do take on that new role?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Change is part of life, though. We're always going to be changing. And so I guess as I think about it, there's kind of change that you have some control over and change that you have no control over, right? So the change that you have some control over is how you strategically plan what you want to do, and how you aspire to, moving an organization or a group or a team function over time to accomplish new, other, bigger things. And then there's the change that happens, and a good example, there's probably no better example for 100 years than the pandemic we're in at the moment, right? That's driven a lot of change, and we've had very little control over that. Some control over how we respond, but it happened, and we couldn't stop it. And so I think with the change that we have control over, it's about being thoughtful and strategic and planning. And then the next phase of that is in communicating it to the team members, because change can be uncomfortable for people. They're changing roles or responsibilities or moving, or you're moving people around. But I think usually if you communicate the vision well enough, then people are pretty much on board with change, because if you're doing change for the right reasons to make things better, once you explain it to the team, they realize that, hey, this is the right way forward. The challenge is when change comes along that you can't manage. You know, somebody leaves for a better position, a pandemic happens, and then you have to make decisions more quickly. And you still, a lot of it is still managing the change, is the communication with the team members. But it sometimes needs to be done in a different manner. So, you know, one of the things we did instead of normal meetings is we ended up having weekly updates for all caregivers, or daily meetings around operational changes. So just so people are on the same page. And you can rarely over communicate.
Yeah, so I think I would apply it to understanding. You have to understand your workforce, and I think your workforce is ever changing. I think probably no better example of that is looking at the generational differences of expectations of the workforce, flexibility, agility. You know, the types of commitment aren't necessarily, staying loyal, through thick and thin for 25 years within an organization. It's about how flexible can you be with me to have my own work-life balance. And I'll certainly produce at a very high level, but I need to ensure that an organization is taking care of me. I can tell you those traditionalists and potentially baby boomers and beyond, the older generations, that necessarily wasn't considered. It was more of put your head down and get through it no matter what. And whoever you leave, behind you, so be it. But I think more so we have to be more in touch with understanding that balance and trying to preserve the people within your team to ensure that not too much change also kind of comes across a little too abrasive to them.
Well, first of all, I do think you have to be really aware of where people are at. You can't expect people to be somewhere that they're not. Even in the pandemic, we saw people having challenges in their home life and their work life. So I think it's a matter of breaking down what does change mean, and inspiring people to a better future, but to really break it down so that it's manageable. You can tell people to move mountains, but they may not know how to move a mountain initially. So once again, I'm a big believer in communicating, breaking things down, coaching people, working through, supporting people along the way, making sure they understand that this is scary for all of us. I think really being with people in the moment is also important. We may not have all the answers, but we're going to figure it out together. So I think that strategy has really worked for me. So hopefully it'll work for others as well.
I think one thing that makes a leader, a great leader, is one that's able to implement a culture of growth in the working environment. How important is it for you to build that culture of growth in the environment for your organization?
I think it's not just a culture of growth. I think culture is the right word. I think it's about tone and culture. At the end of the day, what we all accomplish when we're doing anything big is through teams and through people. It's all about the people, right? And so establishing the right culture for your team is very important. And I think how you communicate is very important. Tone is very important. Professionalism and respect are very important. And all these things matter probably most, because if you do that well and you have your team on board, then you can accomplish growth or quality or research or pick your other battle. So I think the most important word in the sentence you started with actually is culture, setting culture and tone. And I think if you do that and structure, even before you have the chance to structure a big 5-year plan or 5-year vision, if you can structure the right style within your team, and part of that is bringing the right people into the team so that the people who are around the table with you are going to be messaging in the same way with the same style. I think that becomes before growth, and then with that you can accomplish growth and all of the other things.
Yeah, so the cliche is if you're not growing, you're dying, if you will. I think creating and instilling a growth mindset in everybody that you're with just kind of almost triggers a component of your brain to start thinking about what else can I bring to the table other than just show up, punch in, do what I'm supposed to do, and go home. By all means, that might be a real steady employee that does what they need to do. But by instilling that culture of growth mindset, this is how you start getting the biggest value of any organization is the people itself. Makes no mistake about it. I mean, there are certainly incredible name brands out there in all industries for that matter. But I think what people potentially miss the most is that it's about the people itself. So if you could kind of create that workforce, whether you're a 500 employee company, 1,000 employee company, or a 10,000 employee company, if you could kind of spread that's the culture we're going to have and feel safe to kind of think that way. Just think of all those minds you're getting thinking from a growth standpoint, how better that's going to be for the organization as a being of itself from that standpoint.
Everything really relies on growth. And for an organization like ours, I'm often asked about, well, what is the market for leadership? Well, to be honest, the market for leadership is probably limitless, so really the aspirations to grow, I think, are really, really important. But you also have to apply a little bit of realism to that. I think a lot of us are setting goals in ways right now that include a lot of stretch, but they also give credit for where people are at today. So there's ranges, and you're kind of always trying to challenge people to do more, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you're giving credit where credit is due. I do think having a vision is important because I do think that inspires people to grow and inspires them to do more and to think more creatively to the problem at hand. And I think that's important as well.
When you think of the word loyalty, what does that mean to you in leadership? And how important is it for you to be loyal to the organization that you're working with, even when it means, when you have to part ways?
Sure. So I think loyalty is incredibly important. And I would put ahead of, certainly in healthcare, ahead of loyal to the organization is first to our patients, right? So I'm a colorectal surgeon, do a lot of cancer and inflammatory bowel disease. And the first thing is always your responsibility to your patient. There's also a responsibility to the organization, of course, but I see it more as to your colleagues because we're a team in how we accomplish anything. Really a team of teams, many teams within any hospital or hospital system. And so absolutely, I think loyalty to the team is very important, but that doesn't mean that you can't move or do something else. Okay. I think the loyalty comes in often in how you accomplish that change and how you communicate that change. So, people, I mentioned earlier, people get recruited away from our team all the time to leadership positions. I did at one stage. I left the clinic and then I ended up coming back. So I guess I left two places. And so the important thing is how you leave, to leave well, again, respectfully, communicating well, being direct with people, telling them as early as you can in the process, telling them why, just doing things properly. And that becomes very important. And as long as you do that, then sometimes we see people come back again, right? So they go away and they'll grow their career and develop a skill set somewhere else, and then they'll come back and they end up coming back and getting a different promotion. So I don't think loyalty and leaving or departing an organization, well, they're kind of two sides of the same coin, but they complement it. As long as you do it properly, they kind of complement each other.
Yeah, so loyalty, first of all, I think loyalty is a two-way street. I think sometimes leaders often misinterpret that, you cannot do anything until you let me know. But I think it actually has to be respected and returned right back to the individual, because that's a relationship and of trust that gets built. And to me, loyalty is built on trust. And trust isn't just kind of given one way. It has to be, back and forth. How important is it? I could tell you that, one of the things I used to say commonly, during orienting new employees into the organization is I try to kind of explain to them is that, there are a couple things that really matter. What are you here for? The fact that now you play for the name in the front of your jersey, not the name in the back of your jersey. So you have to ensure that your loyalty has to be to an organization because you represent now an organization, whether it's providing a service internally or providing a service even more so externally. You have to represent that brand externally, and that's a level of responsibility that is done. So that there's a loyalty to the brand or the organization you're working for that you have to bestow, and vice versa. As I mentioned at the onset, that's a two-way street. The organization has to be loyal to ensure it takes care of its workforce in that aspect of itself. The other component from working side by side with workers is I always kind of use this as I used to kind of have a group in a meeting. We used to all get together and not on Zoom meetings. I used to tell everybody in meetings, look to your left and look to your right, and they look to the left and the right, and they're like, those are the people you have to care about the most because those are the folks that are in the trenches with you. And at the end of the day, pulling together is going to accomplish a lot more than any individualism that occurs. And guess what? The only way you could pull together is if you trust each other, and it really comes and manifests itself during adversity, during tough times, because pulling through together matters more so. So I think loyalty plays into all those aspects.
Well, I guess it depends on the context for how you mean that, right? I mean, first of all, you do have to be true to yourself. And so, you have to understand where your strengths are, where your development needs are. Loyalty for loyalty's sake, if you look at the strict definition of that, I don't think we're in an era where people necessarily, rightly or wrongly, get credit for just being loyal. You always have to deliver a little more, right? I mean, but if it, being loyal to purpose, being loyal to self, being loyal to your peers and your colleagues, being loyal to purpose, those are all good aspirations. But obviously, when push comes to shove, all of us have had to make tough decisions. I had to let go people early on that had been very loyal to the organization, but unfortunately, they weren't evolving the way they needed to. So these are all balancing acts, and it always depends probably a little bit on context.
How important do you think it is for a leader to not only learn how to lead, but also how to follow?
Well, I think it's very important to learn how to follow, but maybe not follow. Maybe I change that slightly. So let's there's almost two parts to your question. So first, learn how to lead. That's important because not everyone wants to be a leader. Some people are leaders even though they don't realize they're leaders. They lead clinical teams or whatever. So again, a lot of it comes down to your style in accomplishing what you do. Some people are brilliant leaders, and they don't think of themselves as leaders just because they talk to people nicely, they give them the right suggestions, they coach them, and things happen very well. Do you need to learn to follow to be a leader? I think it's rather than following, I think it's walking with. So if I think of my executive team, I want to be with them on the same page as them, so we're talking all the time. And my goal is to try and let them move and let them accomplish different things, and many others through the organization. So it's facilitating things that can be accomplished by my team. So it's not following in a way, but it's shepherding. Sounds too patronizing. It's not that either. I'm not coming up with the right word, but it's that you want to be behind helping or around helping your team.
Yeah, so that's a great question, because I will tell you that a leader who thinks they have all the answers is probably failing the minute they think they have all the answers. I think a leader's responsibility is more of a serving role and not to think that they are the ones to come to for all the answers. But on the flip side, they have to continually serve the folks they're responsible for, and then subsequently also be in a learning mode to try to say, I don't know everything. How can I learn something new that I don't know today that I could bring back to the people that I have been entrusted to lead? I think that's so it's a little bit of a mistake to think, well, I'm the leader, so I have to be the one that knows it all. That's not necessarily the truth. You do not need to be the one that knows it all. That being said, I think as a leader, you have to set your mindset in a mode to constantly try to learn, either from internally from your organization, from other peers within your industry, or quite frankly, sometimes we learn from another industry outside of the one we're in. And no better way to look at that than in the healthcare environment. You know, we're all in the healthcare environment. We look to each other to learn from other organizations within healthcare. But quite frankly, sometimes we need to be looking at another industry that's not healthcare to possibly learn something that we could actually bring back and help those that we lead.
I think following is essential. I mean, even though, you know, a lot of people would define me as a leader, I report to a board. You know, I'm following their lead. So all of us, any leader, I believe, is also a follower. And I think you need to be a follower. You know, I used to have a board chairman who was a 2-star general, and he used to put on a piece of paper before every meeting, this is when people met face to face in the old days, he used to put LW, LW, and I always wondered what that meant. And he described it, and he said, it means listen, wait, listen, wait. And the reason for that is because when you're a 2-star general, everybody waits for you to ask the first question or to proclaim, something in a meeting or to make a decision, et cetera. And the way to really captivate the hearts and minds of people is to listen, and try and adapt. I mean, you asked a question about change management. It's the same kind of thing with change, right? You've got to listen for context. You've got to ask good questions. And sometimes you just have to get out of the way. So to me, that's, followership is key to leadership.
In the process of hiring, interviewing plays a pretty big weight in the decision-making of whether or not the person is going to get the job. What interview types do you think play a role in helping define a powerful leader? And what is your technique when you go into that room and interviewing that next surgeon or CFO or whoever it might be? What is your technique in picking that right person?
So, the way I tend to do an interview is I start off just by, I've always obviously seen the CV or a bio or something else that will happen. And that's how somebody's got to the kind of interview pool. And then we'll ask them just to talk about their experience to date and their journey. I find you learn a lot just listening and watching people as they talk and as they talk about their journey and their experiences. People almost share more through their eyes and how they're connecting with you sometimes than from the words they say. So I think that can give you a very good measure of somebody. And then depending on the position, I'll ask them about situations that they're likely to encounter and how they'll handle them. Talk about their vision for the future, talk about why they're looking for this job. I keep it very conversational and talk through different things. I don't really have a structured set of like 8 questions that I'm going to go through with everybody for a certain position. I'll often know what I want as those questions, but I'll just gradually bring them up in conversation and talk through it. And that's worked, at least for me, I think so, very well. I've been lucky enough to work with some amazing people that have joined various teams that I've had the chance to be on.
That's a tough one because I think, an interview is a defined moment in time. And I think someone could come for an interview and absolutely crush it. When they're with you, they could say all the right things, answer every question they're thrown their way, ask all the right questions, and you could walk away. You're like, wow, this is a really impressive individual. They scream as a leader, but then, you just don't have enough of an embodiment of time or time spent with someone saying, was that just kind of a facade? Is there more depth behind it? So I worry a little bit about that, because I think interviews alone are not enough. I think one has to do their due diligence and try to do some research. At the same time, I think that's why I'm probably more focused on behavioral aspects when I meet with someone. I've commonly told everybody I've worked with in my career, I'm looking for a good person. I want a good person to work with. I don't necessarily need to have, the best all-star or the best, the one who everybody says is the best. I'd rather understand, I want a good person, because a good person, has the right values that I think would lend itself to an organization. And when we are thrown things that we don't know our way as part of an organization, you want a good person standing beside you, and not somebody who's going to cut your legs the minute they get a chance to cut your legs.
I'm a big fan of really understanding, really more behavioral interviewing. Storytelling, show me, give me examples. I want to hear the story behind the story, because I think that's really important. I mean, you may not know, people can tell you a lot of things, right? But it's always good. I think you always learn a lot more when you let people talk. I mean, the person ought to do most of the talking, not me, the interviewer. And so I really like behavioral and scenario sorts of interviews, because I think that really gives you a better feel for where people are at.
So COVID's kind of pushed us all into this, virtual world, and having everything online. It's been hard, I'm sure, with interviewing. Do you think that that's affected interview process and picking the right person for the job?
Has it affected it? Absolutely, right? It's changed it dramatically. Has it been a problem? I actually don't think so. I think people have adjusted so much to virtual. But I think, when we're recruiting people, whether it's for clinical positions or senior leadership positions or other things, we end up using a virtual format often for the first interview. And then when we get down to a couple of, finalists or whatever else, we'll usually have them come physically to meet people. And then I'm a great believer, certainly for significantly important roles, leadership positions, in having dinner, going out and spending time socially with somebody and getting to know them a little bit, and often with their spouse or partner as well. So, and I think for important positions, you have to close the loop like that as well. And so, but these virtual interviews have worked very well for the first phases. And actually, I think it's been really efficient, because, when you think of people who otherwise would be trying to fly in, and you got to fit them in and out of schedules and things like this just works really well.
Yeah, it's been hard. I just went through one myself. I think it's hard because I think if you just do everything virtually, you're just not going to be able to make that connection. I think you could certainly start virtually and get it to a point where maybe you shortlist it to maybe one or two final candidates. But I still think you got to be able to look in the white of someone's eyes face to face with enough social distance to be able to subsequently, have that conversation. Because, again, I set a face-to-face meeting with someone, it's 30 minutes, right? And now I'm face-to-face, the 30 minutes are up. Now we get up and we'll walk, and, hey, you want a drink? Let me go get you a drink. You want a water? I'm going to walk with you. And, there's just that interaction that occurs. And I don't want to, there's a value to that extra time spent. If we only do Zoom meetings, it's 30 minutes and you log in, and when we're done, you're logged off, and you'll go get a water and I'll go get a water, but we're not going to have that time going to get a water together. And I think there's something to that, probably needs to be studied and researched if it hasn't been yet, but I think there's still a little more value in at least making that personal in-person touch point.
I think you do lose something, honestly, in virtual. But, I'm not going to say that it can't be done, and it can't be done for certain roles, because, I think we're living in a world of ands right now. And But, for example, if I were hiring a senior leader to join my executive leadership team, I would want to meet the person in person, because, you do miss out on some of the nonverbal communication. You miss out on some of the, some of the cues and some of the things you just don't necessarily get on virtual. But again, I think there's lots of roles where virtual is probably fine.
As leaders, we progress as leaders. Leadership styles change over the years. How do you think your leadership style has changed over the past 10 years?
That's a good question. I haven't really thought about it. Well, certainly experience. That's probably, you should probably be asking this question of people who've worked with me or for me or whatever. They might give you a very different answer. But from my perspective, obviously experience, right? So I've had more time in leadership roles. Before I joined Cleveland Clinic, Florida, I ran digestive disease and surgery for Cleveland Clinic Enterprise. So that's, in Ohio alone, it's a group of, 200 surgeons and hundreds of nurses and many other caregivers across many hospitals. And so I've been lucky to work with lots of people and lots of teams. And as you do that, and as you work with big groups in complex settings, looking after everything from cancer to emergencies to transplants to other things, lots of situations come up. Decision-making, people, managing people, coaching people, operations, finance. So, so you just see so much more going through, that it just gives you better awareness. And often you can be a little better at seeing things before they become problems and adjusting and coaching people. I honestly think surgery as well was a great platform for learning, because, if you're doing reasonably complex operations, you have to be really good at multitasking. You've got to be able to listen. You've got to be able to function as part of a highly functioning team, and that means creating a safe space so that others can speak up and talk to you. So a lot of those skills transfer very well over to leadership. But I would think that, and probably time and experience, are the things that I would think of.
I will tell you that I think one leadership style that has not changed. Let me start with that, Nima. I think one leadership style that has not changed is I've always tried to be authentic. I think the one thing that I always try to represent myself is being an authentic individual. So what you see is what you get. There's no hidden agendas. I'm not playing political minds, political gaming to kind of game something around. I try to just be as raw as it is, and I'll be happy with you. I'll be mad with you. I'll cry with you. We're going to celebrate with you. So I think that's one thing I have not changed. I think one thing I have grown and constantly I'm reminding myself is, there's a drive to constantly pursue excellence. And sometimes earlier on in my career, when I was a leader, that sometimes came out the wrong way. I think people who really knew me knew that I really had my heart in the right place, but it wasn't being portrayed in an effective way. I'm probably more mindful now in how that gets communicated. And that requires taking a pause, thinking it through, making sure how it's going to affect everybody else before it comes out. But the authenticity doesn't change going through that process.
Well, I think early on in my career, I really had a paradigm. I've worked for some very, very strong leaders. And I think I had a paradigm that, you needed to be strong in your decision making, and you had to sort of show up in a certain way, et cetera, et cetera. So I really think I have expanded my view of what leadership looks like. I've always believed that leaders can be formal leaders or informal leaders, but at the same time, I do find myself listening more, a lot more. I find myself asking more questions. I think the whole notion of how we engage in decision making and leadership has really involved. You do need to be systematic, but you don't need to be, didactic about it, if that makes sense to you. And again, I think this notion of sort of collectiveness is really important in leadership today, because I think I've never been what I would consider an autocratic leader. In the old days of command and control, I've never thought that style worked. But I also think, the more experience you have, the more you're able to sort of settle in with your style. Mine happens to be more collaborative, and I think my leadership has really evolved to align to that more.
We kind of alluded to it earlier, like growth, and how you even mentioned yourself, you left Cleveland Clinic and came back. And you need to sometimes move on to be able to grow as a professional, as a human being in general. What are some things that you hold value to yourself to be able to help you make those decisions for the next step?
Make the decisions for the next step.
Yeah. There's some things that have to be valuable to you for you to look at it and be like, it's time for me to do this. I find this valuable. I'm going to make that decision.
Yeah. So first, I don't think you necessarily have to leave an organization, but often you'll have to take on other responsibilities. And sometimes it's within your organization, sometimes it's without. So as an example, I'm actually president-elect for our national society, so American Society of Colorectal Surgeons, and many of my colleagues participate in doing things for the society. And so there can be great leadership opportunities outside of where you work and what you do, whether it's pharmacy or anything else. I've tried to contribute in different ways to different groups. And so you kind of acquire the experience in different areas, whether it's around surgery or quality and operations around the hospitals you work in, or societies on the outside, or at home with family and kids and all that. And, as you go on, you learn different things and you see different ways you can contribute. And you realize that, hey, maybe I do want to be able to help direct more than just be part of this team. And then you have to wait and see if the opportunity comes up. And so it depends on what the opportunity is. And you see if it's something that you think will give you more ability to grow, or often it's more ability, honestly, to contribute to others, to help others. And that's certainly what's been one of the things for me that I think I've been very fortunate. I've had phenomenal friends, mentors, and colleagues who I've learned from, and I kind of get to give back now. But the decision about each change, it's a little bit of realization of, hey, there is a next step that might be interesting or something I could pursue, and then it's a little bit of, is that opportunity even available? And that's sometimes when you have to think, can I do something within my current organization, or do I look at an opportunity outside? And if you're looking at something outside or involves a house move or something like that, obviously it's a whole lot bigger deal and there's a lot more thought goes into it.
Yeah, I think there's a belief in people that I have, and to be able to do great work and allow them to get to a certain point, that they should be able to do what needs to get done. And I feel that sometimes, that's a trigger point to understand I've done what I've needed to do here. It might be going a different direction, or it's just the time has arrived for me to now move on and affect an entirely different new population or a new group of employees tacked on. Don't care, because I will tell you, as someone who has transitioned in the last 6 months, I've been able to really kind of value the fact that I still care deeply for all the folks in my previous organization, but I have created so many relationships now in the current organization that now my span has grown that much more larger. And for me, it's trigger points. It's about understanding that you've kind of developed enough of a group of individuals that have gotten to a certain level, and really you could lend those skill sets somewhere else.
Yeah, I'm a big fan in equaling the playing field. I think leaders play a really strong role in equaling the playing field. I mean, we saw the evidence of that probably best represented in disparities in healthcare over the last pandemic, and I think that's really been amplified. So I do feel a certain moral obligation to that. but also to fairness, to really making sure, that you're present with people, that you're living your best sort of self every day, that you're not taking people for granted, things for granted. I think all of that's really important. But I also believe in having fun along the way. I do think, you need a little fun. I'm a big fan of nature. I love nature. So I try and get out and, breathe a little bit, spend time with family and friends. I think all of that is nurturing in many ways.
Do you think that someone's household, the way that they were raised, or their circle of friends in their early childhood played a role in the early life development as a leader?
I don't know. There could be psychology. There probably is psychology research on this to tell you the right answer. My perspective on it, though, is that it probably does. I think many of communication skills and style and things like that are things that we learn early. And if you're doing things like that from an early age, in a young age, and your family are coaching you in the right way, so you have the right communication skills and style and things like that, I think that makes it much easier. And it's not that people can't learn these skills formally as part of a leadership course. But I think it's much easier for, not that you still can't learn from leadership courses, but it's much easier for people who've started young. And so if they've had the right support from friends and family and other things to help them early on, I think it certainly makes it easier.
100%. I mean, there's no question. There's no, this goes back to my comment earlier about a good person, right? So, you can't teach that. You either have good values that were instilled to you by family, someone influential in your life, and it's almost shaped you internally for every decision point that you've had to make throughout schooling, throughout your career development. You can't teach that. And I hate to say it, but sometimes you have people that are malicious, or are just not authentic, are very manipulative, and it's just the way they brought up. I mean, it's not even a fault to them. It's just kind of the environment that they were raised. You can't change that from occurring. So to me, back to your question, Celine, I mean, it is 100% tied to those values that you are brought up with and have kind of held true to yourself since day one.
Yeah, I think your family and core values and however you were raised, I think, yes, I do think that plays a role. Can you evolve it? Can you change it? I think you can. I really do. I'm not a firm believer that your past necessarily has to predict your future. But it does require, I think, a certain commitment to understand yourself. I think any good leader needs to understand themselves and their motivations and their drivers, what makes them tick, where you need development, where you're strong, and of course your family, or however you were raised. A lot of people don't have families, but they have influencers in their life. I think that does have an imprint. I just don't think it necessarily has to define you if that's not something you want to hold to yourself, or it's not how you see yourself.
To end it off with the last question, this web series is called 2021 Vision. So what is your 2021 vision?
My 21, as of the last few weeks, my 2021 vision is that I hope this pandemic settles down pretty quickly. We have more than twice as many patients in hospital at the moment as we did with the biggest previous peak. And that puts an awful lot of stress on our team and our staff. And obviously there's a lot of people who are very sick and some dying. So I guess my aspiration for 2021 is that this settles down and our teams can function better and get over the trauma and how tough it is to be looking after all these patients who are getting sick and dying, and then aspiring to more and more people being vaccinated, because we know that it works well. And that's a very emotional statement, because I know there are people in the community who don't agree, but we know from seeing the patients come in and from seeing patients getting sick who weren't vaccinated, because now about 90% of our patients who come into hospital aren't vaccinated. And many of them are going, oh, I wish I got vaccinated. Can you vaccinate me now? Not now.
It doesn't work like
So,
that.
No, it doesn't work like that. So that's kind of my hope, is that we'll get through the worst of this really soon, and get to the next phase where we can prevent other people getting sick and protect other people.
Yeah. So, for me, it's about how can we, as a culture of leaders, look to kind of set the forefront in the future. I mean, there's a lot of leadership development, skills that have been talked about, and there's been certainly a lot of publishings and readings that you could read up on, but it's really about saying, what is that new aspect that we really need to hone in and pay attention to for the next decade or the next 20 years. To me, I'm a constant learner. I think one thing we have to be mindful of is to ensure that we are not necessarily getting pigeonholed to saying, you have to conduct yourself this way. This is the way you need to conduct yourself and go forward. Because I fear that if we do that, we're gonna pigeonhole ourselves a little bit, almost box ourselves in, and we're not gonna enable the ability to say, are we limiting ourselves by thinking we are doing what is the most popular thing? And I think that I will tell you that my vision would be to ensure that there's enough thought leadership amongst our community, to ensure that there are those that are bold enough to be able to go out and set the bar and sometimes blaze the new trail that needs to be blazed.
Well, it kind of, once again, I always think about things on multiple levels. I mean, when I think about the world and I think about all the things that we're experiencing right now, obviously, I have a personal mission and a vision, to live in a world that's more safe, more equitable, more inclusive, where everybody can reach their highest potential for health. I mean, you look at everything that's going on, whether it's environmental disasters or the pandemic or the immigrants on the borders. I mean, really, there's so many things that we have opportunities to improve. So I think about that. When I think about my own organization, I obviously think about, as a leadership organization helping leaders, I want to help individuals lead their highest potential, because by doing that, then they will be able to go out, and there's a ripple effect that happens. There's a reason why I love my job and I love the work, is because you can convince leaders to do a certain thing and you create a certain ripple effect, which is great. I mean, by talking to you, I'm hoping that I will help you become better leaders, and you will in turn turn around to help other leaders. There's a chain reaction that happens when those things get put into play, and those can be very powerful.
That concludes the end of episode 3. We would like to thank Dr. Delgado, Ms. Bowen, and Dr. Delaney for taking the time to join us today. And we would like to thank everyone for tuning in. Make sure to follow us on social media at 2021 Vision and visit our website, 2021vision.com. Until next time, my name is Selena.
My name is Nima.
And we would like to encourage you to think about your 2021 vision.